day. And so there are some significant development challenges that present themselves in India. And I think despite the very good economic growth numbers that we have seen in recent years and hope to continue to see, there continue to be great challenges for India as they move forward.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniel Molina, and you are listening to Insights from Abroad. We are part of the Middle East and South Asia Initiative in the College of Sciences at the University of Central Florida. Our mission here is to educate, engage, and influence the international community. Today, I am joined by Manpreet Singh Anand to discuss some topics surrounding our South Asia series. Manpreet, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful being here at UCF.
So, he's currently an adjunct senior fellow of the Asia Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security and a distinguished professor of practice in the Near East South Asia Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. In the past, Mr. Anand has served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, as well as the United States Department for the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, where he served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Asia Bureau. Previously, Mr. Anand worked for Chevron Corporation as a Senior Policy Advisor and provided policy analysis and guidance on emerging geopolitical and socioeconomic issues. Mr. Anand is also a member of the Pacific Council on International Policy and was a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He earned an MBA and an MA in International Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, as well as a BS in Electrical Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. So, Manpreet, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the attacks on Indian police in Kashmir.
Yeah, so, first of all, again, thank you for having me here. I think it's wonderful that UCF and your College of Sciences is trying to invest in broadening the exposure to students and faculty and community members across the Orlando area in thinking and doing more in India, because I think there's great strategic value as well as burgeoning interest in what the United States can do to strengthen its relationship in India. And it's important that you bring up this recent attack that just happened a few days ago in India. And while it hasn't necessarily caught the attention of a lot of media here in the United States, which seems to be wrapped up daily and hourly and sometimes minute by minute in our own domestic politics. These are the kinds of international incidents that we ought to be paying more attention to because they can pose a significant risk to maintaining peace in an important part of the world. And these horrific attacks come at a time when India is about to undergo its own general elections. I don't think the timing of these attacks were any accident. And it is, in my view, meant to try to inflame tensions in India as well as in Pakistan. It was claimed the attackers claimed responsibility very soon after the attack, and it's a JEM, Jaish-e-Mohammed, is a terrorist organization that we have long tried to address as an international community, and my hope is that not just India and Pakistan, but the entire international community comes together to try to root out this menace so that innocent lives aren't taken. And so my hope is that this attack opens the eyes of many to the real dangers that are being posed in a part of the world where there has been long-standing tension already. So there's much to do on this. I noted with interest that just this morning there are announcements about India and France and other members of the UN Security Council trying to put forward some action in the UN Security Council against JEM. And so I hope that these efforts and others help to galvanize the international community to address this.
And given the U.S. and India's interesting relationship, not quite an ally, not quite an adversary, kind of something in the middle. What role, if any, do you think the United States government should be playing?
Well, I don't consider the United States and India to be anywhere close to being adversaries. If anything, we're allies in everything but name. I think over the years, our strategic interests have converged, and we have seen this through successive administrations and governments on both the U.S. and Indian side. And so this is a convergence that I think is nonpartisan on both sides. We have shared interests in peace and security and democracy across the world, and I think those interests will continue to converge. So that's notwithstanding any incidents that may happen over the course of time. In terms of your question about the U.S. role, I think part of it is what's happening now, which is working within the international community's structures like the UN Security Council to address some of the root causes of these attacks. In my time in government, we made sure to keep the channels of communication open with all parties so that some quiet diplomacy, when and if necessary, can take place so that we can show support where we need to and also show resolve when we need to. And so my hope is that this administration is doing just that. My fear is that we don't always have personnel in place in this administration to be able to have those kinds of conversations at the right levels. But my hope is that those conversations are taking place.
Mm-hmm. And what do you expect the Prime Minister's response will be to this, the reaction from the Indian government?
Well, we've seen one response already, which is what I mentioned, which is trying to work with the UN Security Council members to address this from not just a unilateral stance, but a multilateral stance, which I wholeheartedly applaud. I don't know what other steps the Prime Minister is contemplating. My hope is that despite the upcoming elections and some of the political pressures that comes with, that despite those, that we seek to de-escalate this situation and not escalate the situation.
I was wondering if you could address some of the current geopolitical challenges that India is facing as far as the relationship with their neighbors like Pakistan and China, like their oil interests in the South China Sea, their dwindling freshwater supply. I was wondering if any of these or anything that you might know of, what should be India's priority, possibly as far as which might be the easiest to address if bureaucratic or political barriers are removed?
Well, India has a number of priorities, much of it focused on its own development. There's a great need to provide livelihoods and economic opportunity for its people. A lot of what this government and previous governments have sought to do is to create the environment in which there can be more trade and investment, there can be more economic opportunities for a population that is 1.3 billion and rising, where roughly 300 million of which are living on less than $1.25 a day. And so there are some significant development challenges that present themselves in India. And I think despite the very good economic growth numbers that we have seen in recent years and hope to continue to see, despite there being hundreds of millions of people in India moving into the middle class, which are all good things, there continue to be great challenges for India as they move forward. And so some of the actions that India is taking in and around the Indian Ocean region and even further is to help to secure relationships and resources and economic cooperation to be able to provide those types of economic opportunities for its people. A lot of it will be focused on energy, as you rightly pointed out. There's a great deal of energy demand, and not all of which can be met by domestic supply. And so you very much see India focused on getting, for example, oil and gas supplies from different parts of the world. I will make note that actually just very recently there was a new contract to provide for supply from the United States, which I think has been something that both the United States and India have been working on for quite some time. I think from the United States perspective, it's a way to kind of help diversify India's energy supply away from other traditional sources. India also has been focused on developing its own renewable energy sector in a very meaningful way. I mean, a few years ago, it set out a target to create or bring online 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022. They've been making very good progress on that goal, so much so that they've even extended that goal even further because of the successes they've had in bringing online solar and wind energy. So these are all areas that I think will contribute to India's growth and development, and I think they will continue to look for the right partners in the immediate neighborhood and beyond to help them achieve those goals.
So you all had some great initiatives that they're taking up. I was wondering if I could touch a little bit on your time at USAID and some of the initiatives that USAID led in the region, Central and South Asia, but specifically in India. Maybe a project that you guys worked on. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Development is an area that actually brought me into foreign policy and international relations work. And I'm really proud of the work that we did as an agency in USAID in terms of our approach in India. You know, we've been working in India for decades. We're quite proud of the fact that we worked hand in hand with the Indians on the original Green Revolution that took place a few decades ago, and we've continued that partnership. But I think what we realized during the Obama administration was that as much as we were putting in terms of resources into India on the development front, that our approach could have greater impact if we were able to leverage the real innovation and ingenuity and resources that were on offer within India itself. And so we look to revamp our approach in India such that we look to leverage science and technology. We look to scale up innovative models, many of which were born within India itself. We look to engage in partnership with private actors, with corporations, with foundations, with others, realizing that not all of the expertise and know-how was resident within USAID, but that other actors had a lot to offer. And we sought out new partners. And since you asked for one example, one that I worked on and was quite proud of, and that actually President Obama announced when he visited India in January 2015, was an effort to engage the Indian American diaspora in the development of India. As you well know, there's a vibrant and energetic Indian American community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And more they want to engage in the success of not just the United States, but of India and in that relationship. And so we sought to, and we did create an initiative in which the diaspora could invest in what technically are community investment notes, but colloquially kind of were termed bonds or diaspora bonds, such that money could then be used and on-lent to non-bank financial companies within India who could then lend that money to social entrepreneurs within India who were focused on a number of different things, whether it be women's entrepreneurship or financial inclusion or renewable energy. There were a number of different sectors that were identified. And so it was a way, and I won't go through all the details here, but it was a way to engage a new set of partners with the help of the U.S. government, with some credit guarantee tools that we had to reduce the cost of capital and reduce some of the risk to engage a new set of partners. And so those are the kind of innovative models that we were looking to initiate when we were at USAID.
So I'm glad you brought up the Obama administration. Now, of course, we're under the Trump administration, but I was curious if you could talk about the process behind joining the Paris Climate Accords. India's made great strides in recent years to reduce their CO2 emissions. The big three being the United States, China, and India. India was significantly lower than the first two, but they've made incredible strides in that area. I was wondering if you could talk to me about the process behind it, what the State Department looked like during that time.
Yes, no, absolutely. So, I was in the part of the State Department that covered the region of South Asia and Central Asia. And so, in a way, we were in charge of the relationship and being able to kind of focus on all aspects of the relationship. But it was also, we took great pride in making sure that we leveraged the great expertise that exists across the government, including the State Department, but across the government. And during the Obama administration, there was a special envoy for climate change who really sought to engage the Indians in a much more meaningful way on the Paris Accord, and recognizing that not only are they one of the top three emitters, though of course, as you mentioned, they were far below the United States and China, but that the Indians could play a very useful role in the solution, or the set of solutions, I should say, to address the mitigation as well as adaptation and looking at other aspects. And so we absolutely wanted the Indians to be a partner, to have a seat at the table in thinking through these issues, and not to revert to a position that had been long held, which was taking the role of kind of a developing country and taking umbrage almost at the fact that so much of the developed world had created the issue that we find ourselves in terms of the emissions. And so we tried to break out of that paradigm. And I think to the Indians' credit, they realized that they needed to look forward, not backward, in trying to be partners in the solution. And to President Obama's credit, he put this at the very top of the agenda with the Indians. And so, the president met with Prime Minister Modi 9 times in the span of 2.5 years. I think the most that he met with any other foreign leader during that time. And it was at a time when we were moving the relationship as a whole from one that didn't just look at what we could do for each other, but frankly what we could do together for the world. So it was moving from a bilateral relationship to one in which we could try to work together to address global challenges. And at the top of that list was the challenge of climate change. And to the credit of both President Obama and Prime Minister Modi, they understood this challenge. They understood how we needed to work together, and they spent a considerable amount of their time and capital in trying to address this. And so I know we're at a different time now with the Trump administration. It's unfortunate that they, at least the White House, doesn't even recognize the challenge of climate change. But my hope is that efforts will continue, even if they're at a subnational level or through non-governmental actors. We are already seeing some of that. And then my hope is that we have political leadership at the national level very soon who can put us back on the right track on this issue.
And now that the United States has decided to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords after working so extensively to get other countries on board, how do you see the environment around reducing CO2 emissions and just general world environmental sustainability, and environmental protections. How do you see that environment evolving now that the United States, being the world power after World War II, has decided to kind of cast that aside, has internally here in the United States, deregulated?
Yeah, well, I would say that is true, that at the federal level and largely at the White House's direction, we've seen a rolling back of some really key regulations and policies that I think were putting us on the right path in addressing and confronting this challenge. But the good news is that there are a number of actions being undertaken by state-level authorities, by the private sector, by individuals that who recognize the gravity of the situation and are not waiting for leadership from the White House. And so, while it is true that President Trump did walk away from the Paris Accord, even on that, we do have an opportunity, a chance, frankly, to rejoin that accord if there's somebody who enters the White House after the next presidential election who's willing to do so. And so the timing, there's a timing element to that allows for us to rejoin that. But that Paris Accord, if was important as a signaling event. It recorded commitments, but they're all political commitments, and so they're more than anything an opportunity for our political leaders to then use those commitments to galvanize action and change. And so I would say it's not enough just to have the right political leadership. You have to have a lot that goes behind that, the right investments, leveraging the right technology, looking at the right mix of energy supply, addressing issues around efficiency, addressing issues around adaptation. There's a whole, and not just looking at energy, looking at agriculture, looking at lots of different sectors. And so there's a lot of work that can be done outside of the federal government that can help us continue along this path of addressing this existential threat.
Now, I wanted to ask you again about the overall foreign policy of the United States towards India. I wanted to see if you could maybe compare how it is now under the Trump administration to how it was generally around the Bush-Obama era. Obviously, those were distinct administrations and distinct in Republican and Democrat, one right after the other. But I have a general sense that it was a little bit more cohesive back then. Our general foreign policy had a little bit more of a direction. What are your colleagues at the State Department, saying? Like, how do they feel about the administration's foreign policy, and what are your thoughts?
We have seen both Republican and Democratic support for having a robust relationship with India. And we've seen this both from the halls of Congress as well as from the administration. And so, we've seen a trajectory from the time that President Clinton visited India roughly 20 years ago now, to President Bush embarking on a signature initiative with the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement that really sought to bring India as a strategic partner to the United States, to President Obama, who I think expanded the relationship to heights that we had never seen before. As I mentioned earlier, thinking about not just what we could do for each other, but what we could do for the world, whether it came to climate change or counterterrorism or connectivity. And now to the Trump administration, where I don't think we've actually seen a change in mindset. We've actually seen a reinforcement in mindset. As the Trump administration has sought to identify, the importance of the Indo-Pacific region and India being a key partner in promoting peace and prosperity throughout the Indo-Pacific. I think that continues a long trajectory of of making sure that we continue to converge in terms of our strategic interests between the United States and India. I think the question is how, right? And that's a question that is always difficult for any administration. I think there have been there has been some real progress made on the how question. You know, we've doubled down on looking at how we can work with the U.S. Work with the Indians and with the Japanese in a trilateral structure. There have actually even been a couple of meetings, very high-level meetings, between the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia on how to ensure that that we maintain kind of a rules-based order throughout that region. I think there's been continued cooperation on the defense side between the U.S. and India, and that is only looking more and more positive. I think on the economic side is where I would say there's both good news and bad news. There continues to be significant interest from U.S. private sector actors to invest in India due to probably mindsets on the U.S. side as well as upcoming elections and a populist streak on the Indian side. I think there's a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back action on that. Not to mention the mindset of President Trump in thinking about economic relationships almost solely through the metric of trade deficits. I think that can be really dangerous when there's so many other aspects to the economic relationship that ought to be weighed. So those are certainly things to watch out for that could derail the relationship. Mm-hmm. But on a whole, I think it would be it would be faulty to think that the fundamentals have changed in any way. I think both for the United States and India, we are continuing to have a very positive trajectory with the relationship. The question is, will the slope of that trajectory be very steep or will it be shallow? And that's dependent on a number of different circumstances, but the slope is positive, and I think that's something that we need to continue to encourage.
Yeah. That's very comforting, at least to know that it's on the right track for the most part. And do you think that the upcoming Indian election could alter the trajectory of U.S.-India relations at all?
No, I wouldn't. As I mentioned, I mean, I don't think we're looking at anything that would necessarily alter the fundamentals of the relationship. There are things that can always, put a different take or change the way different initiatives are put forward depending on the political leadership on either side, right? And as I mentioned, when President Trump came into office, he made it very clear that he was very focused on trade deficits and has said some things even within the context of the relationship with India, and some of the trade benefits that they have enjoyed for years about trying to use that or threaten the elimination of those benefits and to use that as leverage to get other trade-related policies. And so that can, in a way, derail those conversations. I don't think they would derail the relationship as a whole. I think we've built enough trust on both sides to know that we can try to work through these issues. And I would say the same on the Indian side. I mean, nobody knows what the outcome is going to be of the upcoming elections. I think it's safe to say that if we do see Prime Minister Modi retain his position, that we would see a continuation of some of the same policies, especially towards the United States. I think if we were to see some other arrangement or even some type of coalition, then it paints a little bit more of a complicated picture. And this is true of any coalition government in which you have to try to take into account a number of different actors who have power. And it's a lot harder to institute the kinds of policies and reforms you might have in place. So we'll have to look at that as and when that comes.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about the cultural side of India, not so much the political. I have a few numbers I wanted to throw at you. According to a Gallup World Affairs survey, India is perceived by Americans as their 6th favorite nation in the world, 71% of Americans view India favorably. And a 2017 poll by Gallup found that 74% of Americans view India favorably. That 71%, was from 2015. So in those 2 years, it went up by 3%. This is despite the arguable lack of breaking news and headlines regarding India in the traditional American news cycles.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what do you think drives such a positive opinion of India, and why do you think Americans are?
Well, we've got Bollywood, so that's one thing.
Sure.
No, but putting that aside, I think here are some other numbers for you.
Mm-hmm.
Indian Americans make up close to 4 million of the U.S. population, and you're starting to see Indian Americans take up positions of leadership in lots of different sectors. It's not just doctors and engineers and real estate moguls. It's also political leaders, business leaders, social activists. And so you have Indian Americans in lots of different segments of society. And Indian Americans actually constitute the wealthiest ethnic segment in America today.
Really?
And so with that wealth comes more notoriety, and so I think you find that Indian Americans have tried to come to the United States and make a good life for themselves, for their families, but also contribute back to the community. And it harkens back to something that we talked about earlier about even U.S.-India relations, in that there's a common set of values around democracy, around freedom, around having a good and positive work ethic and what that means in terms of creating opportunities for you and your family. And so that's some things that are shared. Also, the notion of entrepreneurship is inherent within Indian society and within American society. And so I think for all those reasons, there's a lot of positivity associated with Indian culture, with Indian heritage, and with Indian Americans. And I know I speak from a biased point of view because I'm an Indian American myself, but my hope is that continues to be the case, because I think there are a lot of good things that we can share, that we can contribute to the United States, and it is one of the things that makes this country great.
Well, Manpreet, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today, and we thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences and insights with us. If you want to learn more about today's guest, our mission, or our program, you can visit us at our website or go follow any of our social media pages. For the Middle East and South Asia Studies program here at UCF and the India Center, we thank you for listening.